If you like what we do here over at Aircrew Interview and would like to support us and help us grow, you can head over to our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Aircrew Interview, where you can donate monthly. We have different tiers ranging from $1 per month right up to $25, with each tier offering different rewards. All the monthly donations greatly help us to continue creating these video and audio interviews, so please take a look and I thank you in advance. Enjoy. Gonky, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I have to say it was it started with my dad. He was a aircraft mechanic. So really as far back as I can remember, I've had an interest in airplanes because that's what my dad did. And I think like most kids, they're just kind of interested in, what their parents do. And I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My dad worked for Aramco Oil Company. So my mom wasn't allowed to work. So she stayed home and took care of us. And so when dad came home, I just picked his brain about what he did. And he was a mechanic, but that's probably where it all started, was with my dad, really.
Nice. So I have to ask, why did you decide to join the Navy and not the Air Force?
The Air Force wouldn't take me.
Right.
It's kind of the standard story. My interest in aviation started with my dad, and he had friends that flew in the military, and they were kind of, I would always pick their brains about stories and stuff, but I was just a little annoying kid, I think, sometimes in their eyes. But, Top Gun came out, and just like lots of other people of my age became inspired to be a naval aviator, because I wanted to be Maverick, right? Tom Cruise played it well. But when it came time for me to actually join, I got rejected several times, primarily because when I was younger, I had asthma, and asthma was a showstopper with no waivers in the Air Force. So when I applied to the Air Force, as soon as they found that out, they said, "Sorry, kid." Tried the Air Force Reserve as well, thinking that maybe they're slightly different, but they said no. And then the Navy, in the end, the Navy did have a waiver process. This was before the internet. So, Mike, these are just things I kind of learned on the fly. As a typical young person joining the military, you go to MEPS, and back when I was younger, you go to MEPS, and that's when you find out. It's like, oh, that's a showstopper. That's a showstopper. And, the standard things, as long as you had full motion and good eyesight, I was reasonably sure I could make it. But yeah, back then asthma was, you couldn't get a waiver for it in the Air Force. And to be honest, I don't know if that's changed or not. I'm older now, but yeah, that's primarily what drove me to the Navy. I actually applied to the Navy twice, and it wasn't until after September 11th, because I joined in 2002. I had been out of college for about 2 years, almost 2 years at that point. And I joke, but I think there's some truth to it. September 11th tragically happened, and then I think they lowered the standard because they needed people, and then they let me in. So
right.
I'm happy it turned out that way. I enjoyed being a naval aviator.
So let's talk about some of your ground training and your initial flying training before you got onto the Hornet, and some of the aircraft you started flying, and how did you personally find it?
Well, my initial experience military flying was, we were here in API. They don't call it API anymore, which is basically ground school in the Navy. But I was here at Pensacola, and they hand out this sheet that tells you where you're going for your primary training, and it said Vance Air Force Base, which is not Navy. And I was confused, and my classmates were laughing at me because I was one of the lucky ones that got chosen to go as part of an exchange program they were working at the time. Hey, we'll send like a handful of Air Force student pilots to Navy training, and then you guys send us some Navy pilots for Air Force training, only at the primary level, right? So back then, T-34 if you're a Navy, T-37 if you're going to go train with the Air Force. So while I was in ground school here, in Pensacola, I found out I was going to Vance Air Force Base to fly the T-37, which at the time I found really humorous because just a couple years ago they had rejected me, and somehow I found my way into an Air Force airplane as a Navy student pilot. Uh, I will say this, Mike. Prior to military, I had civilian flying experience in the form of just flying Cessnas. I had about 700 hours. I was a
Oh
CFI.
wow.
When I first got to Navy Ground School, or API, I was really amazed at the speed that they would that they trained us at. I mean, it was literally like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, I had, like I said, 700 hours. I'd been a CFI for about 2 years, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on just basic flying stuff, weather and aerodynamics, and the basics. And uh, the Navy ground school here went through my knowledge in like 2 days, it seemed like. I mean, I was very quickly, I went from feeling comfortable to like hanging on the stabs, just trying to survive with everyone else. And they came in and told us, you guys with prior flying, you either do really well or you wash out. Because you come there with the attitude of, I already know how to do this, but we're going to teach you how to do it the Navy way. And that was difficult for me because like anything, you kind of develop your habits, and I kind of had to break those habits. And my Navy ground school, and then when I went on to Air Force primary flight training, flying the T-37, it was difficult for me, but it was challenging, but it was rewarding at the same time.
So how long did your training last before you got posted to the Hornet? And I have to ask, did you always want to go Hornet?
No, I wanted to fly the Tomcat. So I was class '02 when I got commissioned. So they were still flying the Tomcat. And that was my whole dream. I got into flight training, and it took me, I went pretty quick. So I got to the Hornet in, 2 years? Yeah, no, I got to the Hornet in late '03. It took me just under 2 years to get to the Hornet. But while I was in advanced training flying T-45s, this would have been in 2003, the word came down that, hey, we're going to close down the Tomcat rag. All you guys want to go Tomcats, sorry. And literally 2 or 3 classes ahead of me was the last class to go Tomcats. I don't know. Have you seen Speed and Angels? Rob
Yeah.
Saravalo and Megan Var, we were all at Kingsville together.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and they were just a couple classes ahead of me, and great group. And I was, when they came out, they had this AOM, and because our skipper was a Tomcat guy, and he's like, well, all you guys that want to fly the greatest fighter aren't going to get your chance. They're shutting down the Tomcat rag. And so back then, my second choice was Hornets. And, looking back, since I'm a Hornet baby and I'm biased, I'm really glad it turned out the way it did. Although, it would have been fun to fly. The Tomcat's such a historical aircraft. It would have been fun to fly it, but I'm really happy with what I got.
Yeah, let's get on to the Hornet. So what was it like to fly? And yeah, you have to tell us about your first, trap on the boat and takeoff, because that must have been an absolute thrill in the Hornet.
Yeah, it was, my first flight in the Hornet was awesome. I remember thinking I'm not ready for it. The amount of flights you actually get in the airplane before they throw the keys at you and say, don't kill yourself, it's just a handful.
Yeah.
And it's a significantly more powerful airplane than the T-45. I mean, it's a lot of airplane for a 20-something-year-old person to be unsupervised with.
Absolutely.
And the thing I remember most about it was I felt like I was King Kong, but at the same time I was like, man, if anything goes wrong, my fragile knowledge of the NATOPS is all I got. So I went out and saviored it, and I'm mad I didn't bring my camera with me, but I always thought if I brought a camera my first flight, might not end well, might get a little cocky, but yeah, it was amazing, man. I went out, and it was it's a culmination of all the hard work that I had put into it. I had the asthma thing, which there's an entire story with that. I didn't even think I was going to make it as far as I did. And I'm not a particularly smart person. My academic grades weren't great, but I worked really hard, and like I'm the first person in my family to have a 4-year degree. And my dad was, as he would say, a greaseball mechanic. And to know that his kid was flying a fighter jet, it was really cool, man. It was really cool. It's something that I always remember. And then the aircraft carrier stuff, you go to the carrier in the T-45, which was scary because that airplane's a little underpowered. But in the Hornet, you do it at night, which I'll be completely honest with you, Mike. I don't remember a lot about my night or CQ in the Hornet, except for how scared I was the entire time.
Right.
And maybe some people, I listen to your channel a lot, huge fan of your work, man. But for me, I was worried that, man, I got 2 years of a ton of hard work invested in flying these airplanes, and it can all go away if I just can't do this boat thing. And, to me, that's what put the most stress on me. Because, I'm sitting in the seat I've always dreamed of, and this is the last hurdle, and it's a big hurdle, and I had to, I remember my first pass in the Hornet was not good. I got screaming power calls into the one wire. And then after that, I don't remember the rest of the day traps, but I do remember my first night trap. I made the mistake of, I was in a B model. I sent you a picture of that Hornet. It's like the Smurf camo. I didn't turn down the center map display in the back seat. And when we were at the boat, they had June gloom. So there was like a thick cloud layer at around 2,000 feet. Of course, that's like right in it in the pattern on downwind. And I just remember coming in for my first pass at night, and there's like this halo behind me because I'm in the clouds, and it's distracting, and a lot of things going through my mind. And I remember being on final, and everybody talks about, oh, it's a postage stamp, it's tiny, but it really does start to play mind games, at least with me. And I don't know if it was I've never had a panic attack, but I think the closest I've ever come to having one was as I was making my approach in that first pass. The closer I got, the more I started to kind of lose my mind a little bit. And I just kept saying, just keep it together for another tenth, because you got the TACAN and the HUD creeping down. And man, it got to a point where, I was starting to lose it, and they gave me a foul deck wave off. And so I did a wave off, flew, and I remember flying right down past the angle, and it was such a relief. And I thought, I was almost there. I was like, I can do this. And that's probably, I'm so glad that happened, man, because I don't, you don't take your own wave off. And I don't know what would have happened if they would have let me try to come aboard, because I was mentally, I was not in the right space. And when they gave me that wave off, man, the entire time downwind, I just kind of reflected on what happened. And I played the mental game of, man, all you need was another 10 seconds and you would have been on the ground. You can do another 10 seconds. And, I was able to make it happen. And, the rest is history, so they say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome. The Navy gave me, I've always been a disciplined kind of person, but the Navy definitely gave me a lot of structure in my life, and it gave me an avenue to where I could really apply myself. I got to fly, at least at the time, the best airplanes that they had. I got to, experience all the things I wanted to experience as a kid. And, for me, it made my parents really proud. I don't know if that's the Asian in me. I have a desire to make my parents proud, and they were, and I'm really happy about that. Pretty much every great opportunity that I've had in my life has been a result of my experience in the Navy. Now, that being said, the Navy definitely has its problems. I left after my commitment was over. So I did my commitment plus a little bit of time. But I left because I wanted to, get married and have a family. And I just didn't think that that lifestyle would be good for them. So basically, my priorities changed, and there was no avenue for me in the Navy to do both. There's more of it now. I'm an Air Force reservist now, and on the Air Force side, there are more avenues that you can pursue with aviation and family, which I think that's just a result of the Navy is mainly ships and submarines and all kinds of weird stuff. And aviation's this little thing they do on the side, so there's less opportunity. But no, I don't have any. My time in the Navy, I'll always cherish it, man. And I don't have anything negative about it. It's made me it's made me who I am.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. So we're going to get onto your time in Malaysia. This is fascinating for me. I love kind of like exchange. I know it's not technically an exchange, but I also have a connection with Malaysia. So yeah, talk us through how this Malaysian opportunity to fly their Hornet came about.
Yeah, so I was a RAG IP. I think we were VFA 122. So I closed down VFA 125 as a legacy Hornet squadron as an instructor. And they say we merged, but I will tell you, it was a hostile takeover by the rhinoceros Hornet people. So I was flying rhinos, and my buddy Tiny, he was an ex-Tomcat guy. He's the one that said, "Hey man, there's this job with Boeing in Malaysia. You need to apply for," because he knew I had no interest in flying for the airlines. And I said, "Okay." So I applied for it, Mike, and like months went by. Like a long time. I'm like, well, that was okay. I must not be qualified. Well, the way it works is it's hard because when you decide to leave the Navy, there's this window of time where we called it dropping your letter. So letting basically the Navy know you want out. So it's really hard to apply for jobs at the start of that because an employer wants you sooner than later, right? So I think I dropped my letter a year out. And so you've got this date coming where you're not going to have a job, but at the same time, you can't start applying until you're a lot closer to that date where you're not going to have a job. So it's a little nerve wracking. So I was basically out processing a couple weeks from out processing when I finally got the call, and they're like, "Yeah, we're interested in you, and we would like to interview you for the job." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And a guy named his call sign was Sandy. He was an F-15 guy. He ran the program. Great gentleman. And he interviewed me. And I remember one of the things he asked me was, "Are you a Top Gun graduate?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good." And I like during the interview, I was like, "Hey, Sandy, I know you're asking me questions, but can I ask why that's good?" And he said, "Well," he said, "you're going to another military and they do things differently than they do in the U.S. And we have found that Air Force fighter weapons school guys and Navy Top Gun guys are much more rigid in their thinking, and it's hard for them to adapt." So I said, "Yeah, no, I'm definitely not a Top Gun guy." And so we did the interview. It was very, honestly, is quite easy. They were very nice. Boeing HR is phenomenal. And then I didn't hear anything until, I out processed. See you later, Gonky. We moved to Ohio, where me and my wife's family's from, just temporarily. I had got picked up by VFC 13 down in Key West flying F5s as a part-timer, but I hadn't went down there yet. And I'll never forget, Mike, we were driving around. We pulled into, I think it was a Wendy's, me and my wife, and I got a phone call because I was like unemployed, right? So we pull into a Wendy's, and I get a phone call, and it's Sandy's like, "Hey, would you like the job?" And I say, "Yeah, heck yeah, I'm ready to start now." And yeah, so hung up the phone, put the car in reverse. My wife's like, "Where are we going? It's lunchtime." I was like, "Baby, we ain't eating Wendy's. I just got a job." Yeah, so I forget where we went, but it wasn't Wendy's. and I like
Yeah.
Wendy's, but yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. So yeah, he hired me, and I had to tell that was a hard thing to do because the F5 guys were super cool. Every time I went down there on a fighter jet in the Hornet, I'd hang out with them, and I knew a couple of those pilots down there, and they're great. It's a great group, but I had to tell them, I was like, guys, sorry, I got this incredible opportunity to go to Malaysia and fly Hornets. I was like, I can't come down, and they understood that, and that was my first dose of the reserve side of things. If you have a civilian life, like those guys understood, like, oh, dude, we get it. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
So that's the story on how I got the job, and my my wife was like, I'll do it as long as we can bring all of our little puppy. So I called Sadie, hey, can I bring my dog? He's like, yeah, of course you can bring your dog. So I was like, good. It's all hinging on that.
Yeah.
So we spent the next, I would say 6 weeks doing the whole getting ready for the relocation thing to become an expat. There was, Boeing was phenomenal because I was just used to dealing with the government, but Boeing offered all kinds of compensation for, like, hey, we know you got to sell your household goods and your cars, and they were extremely helpful in that entire process of just logistically shutting down our life in the US and getting us to literally halfway around the world and starting our life over there.
So I'm interested, why did Boeing want to do this? What did they have in it? Were they trying to sell more aircraft to Malaysia, essentially, by sending a US guy over there?
No, actually, it's actually the Malaysians. So when the Malaysians bought the Hornets in the late 90s, they also got, part of the deal was an American instructor.
Right.
And you've probably experienced this too, having been to Malaysia, but they put a lot of value in, let's say, like a subject matter expert being there with them. So I quickly picked up on the fact that they were really proud as Malaysian Hornet Aircrew to have an American fighter pilot there training them. In their mind, I was, coming, from, the big great America, whatever, and they were important enough for me to be there. It was really cool. The dynamic was really cool. So the Malaysians actually are the ones that wanted an instructor there. So they had, when they first bought the Hornets, they sent over a Marine pilot, a Marine Wizzo, a Boeing pilot. So there's 3 guys, pretty sure there's 3 guys over there that trained the initial cadre in the 90s in the Hornet. When the initial cadre was finished training, the Marine pilot and Wizzo left, and that left, his call sign was Podes. He was a ex-A6 and then Hornet guy, and he was their Boeing IP for many years. He ended up passing away over there, actually. And then after him, there was another guy, Skid. Is that his call sign? Yeah, Skid went over there and trained him for, I don't know, 6-7 years. And then he went to Kuwait, and that left the opening up for me.
So yeah, what did the Malaysians actually currently use the Hornet for? Did they use it the same way the US use it, the US Navy?
No, they use that airplane for everything. And when I say everything, so in the States and even in in the UK, they've got airplanes for specific missions. We have the Growler, we've got Strike Eagles, we've got Raptors. Pick your fighter. The Hornet for the Malaysians, I think one of the reasons why they bought it is it'll do a whole bunch of stuff. So they were always training with every weapon it would carry, which we didn't do that in the States. I mean, once a month, once every 6 weeks, I'm doing like a harpoon profile. I did one one or two harpoon profiles in my entire like 11 years in the Navy. You know, laser mav? Yeah, laser mav. They do night, NVG low level.
Wow.
Anything that the Hornet would do, they would do it because, you know, that was their fighter, that was their striker, that was, you know, they needed those capabilities because they didn't necessarily have other airframes to cover, you know, those capabilities. So that was a bit different for me because I went over there and so like I said, some of those missions I hadn't done in a while. They did radar bombing, which you know, we don't, and they have GPS, right? So but they really employed the airplane to, I think, its max extent that it was capable of, and I thought that was really cool. You know, but I mean, if you have, yeah, exactly. I mean, you only have a few of them, and you know, as far as the budget goes, you know, they're spending a lot of money on these airplanes, and they're just trying to maximize their investment.
And obviously, I think I'm right saying that they were all D models, so they're all like two-seaters. Was there any difference between them and the US jets you flew interiorly?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed flying the Malaysian Hornet probably the most out of all. The Malaysian Hornet, or like a model, like an old one, single seat, and that's because the Malaysian D was a little bit lighter than the US Hornets, and they had the big engines. So they had the EP engines on them, and they were low time jets. You know, all the legacy jets I flew in the US, I flew some that were 4G limited. You know, they were, you know, they wouldn't fly straight, right? But the Malaysian Hornets had relatively low hours, the big motors, and they were a little bit lighter, so they performed really well.
What were the cockpits different? Were the different?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, in the cockpit, pretty much everything in the airplane was the same except the radios. They had a different radio in there. I can't remember what it was called. In the Navy, we had the ARC 210, and I could use that really well. But Malaysia put this different radio in there, and I'm told that it was because that radio had some commonality with the other radios they were using in like the MiG-29 and their other fighters, and it had a early data link type capability. Yeah, so the first time I got in the airplane, I'm like trying to make the radio calls, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm talking on guard or whatever, and you know, the whistle's like, oh, hey sir, I got it, you know, and so I had to learn how to use the radios. And to be honest, like I learned how to use the radios, but the Wizzos were so much better at it. Like they would get frustrated with me. Just, hey, so you just let me do it.
They should have. I'll sort it.
Yeah. So really, the only differences were they were a little bit lighter, and the radios were different. But other than that, man, they were pretty much just like the airplanes I flew in the U.S. You know, they were a little bit lighter because they didn't have some of the electronic capability that the U.S. versions had, but that was basically it. You know, there's this rumor going around in Malaysia that I've heard from people that, you know, I think the prime minister says at the time says something weird like, you know, we didn't send them the source key or something, like, you know, these jets are not usable, but that's a complete lie. Those airplanes were really close to US spec, fully mission capable. And they actually ended up using them when I first got there. They actually had a real engagement with some guerrilla warfare up in the northern part of the country. And they actually went up there and employed using the Hornet. They used the Hornet and the Hawk. They went up there and had success. So, yeah. But other than that, it's basically real close to US Hornet.
So we have to ask, what was it like turning up on the squadron for the first day, and how did you feel? Was there a bit of like nerves there, or did you know, connect with all the guys straight away?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say I wasn't nervous. I mean, you know, I think fighter pilots are all kind of prima donnas, and we're super confident when we're in our own little in our own little ecosystem, right? But you get us outside of that, and it's a little bit different. But I was nervous. Mainly because I had been an expat before. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My wife had never been an expat. We had just literally moved halfway across the country. The culture, everything's different. Everyone's driving on the wrong side of the road. I know you'll disagree.
Mhm.
There's one-way roads everywhere, right? And when you combine just I guess the stress of adjusting to, I gotta go do this job flying high performance airplanes. Yeah, I was a little bit stressed, but I tell you what, as soon as I got there, the squadron reached out to me, and within a couple days, I had a meeting with the skipper at the time. Barry was his call sign, and then probably one of their best pilots, G. Ruff. He's a great Hornet driver. And we met over in a place called Gurney Plaza, and it was a real nice area. Boss ordered some pizza, and we just chatted, and he put me at ease. He just kind of, hey, welcome. They're very welcoming people. And from that point on, I went back home. I told my wife, I was like, I think we'll be all right, because I still had my experience was all U.S. fast jet flying, and in the U.S. everyone's leaning forward. Everyone is working hard, and he just his words to me. Barry told me, he's like, I think you're gonna have to throttle back a little bit. And I was like, okay, I can throttle back. And he was right. It took me about 2 weeks, because I had to, get a car and my international driver's license, and the logistics of just being able to get around. And after about 2 weeks of setting foot in Malaysia, I got to the squadron, and after the first day, I was like, okay, things are going to be okay. The guys were just awesome. They welcomed me, like, hey, here's your office, and anything you need. Just super, super helpful, welcoming. And really, man, from day one, I was like, okay, this is going to be all right. And then as time went on, it just that got reinforced from the pilot side, even to maintenance. Part of my job was being a bit of a liaison, helping them with parts,
Right.
The maintenance side of things, because that's really, in my mind, what they struggle with the most. It's just the logistics of keeping the airplanes flying. And so I was always over there hanging out with the maintenance guys, and just a great group, very welcoming, and very proud of what they do.
And did you have to learn Malay? Because was there a language barrier there? Because I've tried Malay, it's quite hard. It's quite a difficult language.
Yeah, well, part of the Boeing relocation package was I think we got 2 weeks of we had a tutor come and teach us, which was kind of cool. I actually learned more from just hanging out with the guys.
Yeah.
You learn just some of the phrases, but no, I could never speak it. Lucky for me, probably, and you, they speak decent English.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty sure it's taught in their schools. And I actually had this conversation with them. I was like, oh, you guys learn English here? They're like, yeah, the way we think about it is like, well, if you don't learn English, how are you going to go out and do, if you become a businessman, how are you going to go out and do business with the rest of the world, right? So they're very focused on, making themselves better, which I thought was cool. And learning English was part of that in their school system, is what they told me.
So let's go into the flying. What was the flying like out there? And would it differ each day? Would you focus more on air to air, air to ground, or how was that over there, the flying schedule?
Yeah, they have 8 Hornets. So when I interviewed, just 8. When I interviewed for the job, I asked, I was like, hey, am I going to be teaching on the operational side, or am I going to be teaching on the training side? Well, it's all the same. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, no, it's one squadron, 18 squadron. They have 8 airplanes. They do all the initial training there, all the any combat stuff, anything they do is out of there. And I thought, oh, wow, 8 airplanes. I got there. They had 4 of the jets configured as we called them in the US, T-birds. So they had a stick in the back, stick and throttles in the back. And then the other 4 were more combat configured, right? They had the Wizzo configuration in the back. All the crews could fly either one and employ the airplane just fine. But that's how they set it up. So when I got there, that was one of the things in my mind was, what not only, Mike, what do I teach them, but what can I teach them? So the one area where I thought Boeing was a little lax, and I asked my boss, I was like, hey, what is it exactly I can say and I can't say, because there's, I just came from flying the brand new Super Hornets at the time, like Lot 33s or whatever. I was all up on the latest and greatest tactics, and the tactics had changed significantly since, the late 90s. And, he just said, man, just teach them their syllabus. And so I got there, and one thing that I noticed was, as far as their training, like what my daily schedule was like, because they only have 8 airplanes, and dude, probably like if you have 4 up jets on a day, that's a good day, right? Nice. So you're talking about limited resources, and you got a pool of aircrew that need training. I did a lot of a modified, like a schoolhouse syllabus, essentially. Basically, I did a lot of refresher kind of stuff. Right. They would pool their resources. They would take like 1 or 2 pilots or Wizzos who were going through an upgrade, and then they would kind of pool their resources to support that. And when that would happen, I would get to do some stuff a little bit outside of the syllabus. And the syllabus covered basically everything, but they stuck to that pretty closely. It got a little bit more interesting when they started to include me a little bit on they would do exercises. So I got to do some of the exercises with them, which that was more operational. But most of my days, man, I was coming in, teaching. I would generally fly, if we had at least maybe 2 up jets, I'd fly almost every day, and that's because they used me as their flying instructor, because everybody else was still, in a military career. I understood it. Like when I was a IP, it's like, man, I got all this paperwork to do, and I got to go do this flight. If I can get this guy to go do the flight for me, I can do all this paperwork and go home, Yeah. So they let me fly quite a bit, when the airplanes were good. I actually did quite a bit of BFM. I did quite a bit of just your basic air to ground stuff. Nothing. They weren't. I didn't do a whole lot of laser stuff, but a lot of we called them dumb bombs, right? Just roll-in type deliveries. But yeah, that's mainly what I did over there. And towards, I would say, I don't know, 6-7 months into it, they actually gave me a couple of brand new students. And with those guys, I did a lot of your standard, we're going to go burn a tank of gas in the pattern. We're going to go do some approaches, that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of it, I say a lot of it was air to air and air to ground, which covers basically everything. But at a more basic level.
One of our favourite subjects on the channel, don't know if you know, is DACT. And obviously you've got that video. It's incredible, that video of you going up against the Su-30. I mean, can you talk us through that for us again? Because how did that come about? Was that normally on the syllabus?
That was my birthday, man.
Oh, that's right.
Mike, let me tell you how awesome the guys at 18 Squadron were to me. It was literally my birthday, and I didn't record it, but earlier that day I went and did a 3v4 or 4v4 against Su-30s, like BVR.
Yeah.
And then I landed, and they're like, "Hey, Gonky, you want to go BFM a Su-30?" I was like, "Yeah." I called the wife. I was like, "I'm gonna be late." Click. Yeah. So it was on my birthday, and they got me 2 flanker fights, a BVR fight, and then I went out and got to BFM BFM a Su-30. That video that I made though is actually the second or third time I fought the flanker. My birthday flanker fight, the story I just told you, I didn't take my camera on that one, but yeah, it was awesome fighting the Su-30. That's one of the main reasons why I was so excited to go over there, because I just doing some quick research. I was like, man, they've got MiG-29s and Su-30s. I'm like, I bet I might get to fight them, maybe see one. And have you ever seen a flanker up close?
Yeah, I went to the Singapore Air Show. It's massive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's say what you want. I think it's an incredible looking, menacing machine. And the first time I saw that thing do its routine, the Su-30 guys would come over to Penang and just practice their routine over the field. It's almost like, the Hornet guys would do things to poke at the flanker guys, and the flanker guys would do things. And the first time I ever saw that jet, there was I would say a half a dozen times I'm like, he's gonna eject. Dude, pull the handle, because the thing stops. It's a huge airplane. It stops and then it gets out of it, and it's pretty amazing. So I was excited to get a chance to fight him. So the video that I have is of me getting the first shots on the flanker. We had 3 engagements there, and I got the shots on all 3. But the first time I went out and fought the flanker, I flew against, his call sign is Fab. He's still in, and he's quite good. So we went out, and my whiz at the time was Termite. He's great, dude. He actually came here to the States a couple years ago. I got to meet up with him again, but we went out and we met in the middle of the country. And I'm not ashamed to say it, but he got the first shot on me 2 out of the 3 times. And it's mainly, in the U.S., in the Hornet community, we would always teach us a very aggressive mindset when it came to fighting like a flanker or a MiG-29. You want to be very aggressive. In practice, when we would just fight one another, this is typically how an engagement will go, right? You're done with your boring bombing mission. You got a couple thousand pounds of gas. Hey, take cutaway. Boom. You start fighting. And for the first year I flew Hornets in BFM, it used to annoy the crap out of me because I fight the senior guys. We'd hit the first merge. They would go up. I would go slightly nose low. As we're coming around beak to beak, I would sell it for everything it's worth and get the first shot. They would call chaff flares, whatever. But then the fight continues. And I just sold all my knots. And then from there, they would just gun me all the way to the deck. Right. So from that point on, I learned, hey, be aggressive, but keep some energy. My experience with the flanker, you can't do that in a Hornet. You gotta, if the guy is good in the flanker, you've got to get the shot and you got to get it quick, because he can do the slow speed thing better than you if he's good.
Yeah.
And he's got a lot of thrust. He's quite the opponent if you want to play the rate game too, the 2-circle game. So you got to get in there and you got to shoot early and shoot quick, and that's what I learned from fighting Fab. The first time I fought him, I tried to execute the same game plan that I would do based on other Hornets, which was I was a little bit ginger with my initial moves because I wanted to preserve some knots for follow-on BFM. That didn't work because he was really good at using the thrust vectoring, and he got slower than I did, quicker than I could, which meant he tracked behind me. So learned that lesson again for the second match we had, and then the third time I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm going for the throat, and I was able to get a gunshot on him. But then the follow-on BFM, I could not maintain the offensive position,
right?
Because he was good. In the video, I don't know who the flanker pilot was that I fought, but the big difference that I saw was a good flanker pilot knows how to use the thrust vectoring. The guys that are junior and newer hesitate to use it because you can find yourself out of knots And in that airplane, it's kind of like in the Hornet. When I first started flying it, the Hornet has a lot of AOA, so you can like sell it really quick, but then you're out of knots, right?
Yeah.
And if you do that enough, you find yourself just falling out of the sky. So a lot of the newer guys hesitated using thrust vectoring for fear they'd run out of knots. And you know, you start, and then you go through the deck, and then you're dead, kind of thing. So, but yeah, Fab was really good at it. In the video that I have, that pilot, he wasn't as good, but the thing that I also took away from that very first engagement with Fab where I got beat was, who do you think ran out of gas first? Who should run out of gas first, right? Me.
Yeah.
I'm in a D model Hornet, which has less gas than the Charlie. And he calls bingo first. And I'm like, what? You know? And so, you know, we're on the way home, and you know, we get to do the phone debrief and stuff, and you know, it's like, hey man, were you really at it? Because that thing carries like, I don't know, 20,000 internal, right? It's a beast when it comes to internal fuel. And I guess he's like, I didn't arrive at the merge with full tanks, you know, in his Malaysian English. And I was like, dude, I was like, that is such a good move. You know, a little bit outside the box thinking. So he had dumped a bunch of gas, because when you think about it, right, if 20,000 pounds is a lot of gas, but it's heavy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So me, if I dumped any, I'd be bingo immediately and have to go home. So I had to hang on to my fuel. But yeah, I was like, man, good on you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So